Hello, my name is Musa Mayer. I am the daughter of the artist Philip Guston, and I work on his legacy with the Guston Foundation.
Hello, my name is Emily Nam. We are art people.
I read from his library, I would try as a teenager when I had the opportunity to impress him with my understanding. This is a man who gave his 11-year-old daughter Kierkegaard. This is probably not the smartest thing to do. And I was fortunate in that I had the kind of disposition that could not enter too dark a place as a result of that. I always felt like to get his attention, I had to try to move to the plane where he was. He was never going to come to me where I was in my ordinary little life.
I had the rare honour of being in dialogue with Musa Guston Mayer, a writer, curator, breast cancer advocate, and for the context of our conversation, she is the daughter of the formidable painter Philip Guston, and her mother is painter and poet Musa McKim Guston. Musa is the president of the Guston Foundation, which you can locate online at philipguston.org. Since his passing in 1980, alongside a team of committed champions of Guston's work, Musa has been involved in shaping her father's legacy, who is recognised today as a modern master. Not bad, Sonny. Pas mal. While pursuing an MFA in writing at Columbia University, Musa published her first title, an intimate memoir, Night Studio, in 1988, grounded in a personal account of being the daughter of Philip Guston. Musa's process of writing as a way of self-discovery and to deepen her understanding of who her father was evokes an awareness of the fragility and beauty of life through what feels to be a natural inclination for storytelling. Originally trained as a mental health counsellor, Musa has authored several books reflecting her journey and diagnosis with breast cancer. She has curated exhibitions and published, amongst others, the award-winning catalogue Philip Guston, Nixon Drawings, 1971 and 1975. Night Studio remains in print after 37 years. Ancestral lineage was present in my thoughts as I approached this conversation with Musa. It can be both a gift and an overbearing force. We cannot escape the generations that have walked before us. I wonder, did reading Kierkegaard at 11 years of age, handed to her by her father, and being exposed to what now feels like a romantic cacophony of late-night conversations amongst the New York art community in the 50s, did this contribute to Musa's ability to reason with words in a way that her father fought for understanding on a canvas, with raw honesty and vulnerability? Musa undoubtedly is an expert in her late father's work. Her knowledge and stewardship have been both a vital force in shaping the legacy of Philip Guston, but also that of contributing to the wider experience and dialogue of art in its present day. Our conversation naturally oscillates to the world of her father. It is Musa's strength and ability to hold with intimacy her own experiences in life, a journey which she shares and facilitates by reflection. This is a testament to Musa's presence and innate ability to bring that which is necessary to the public eye for our own contemplation. Hi Musa, I'm incredibly grateful to be speaking with you today and thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
You're in Woodstock currently?
Yes, I am based in Woodstock, where my parents had their home and where I grew up, at least part of the time, and where our foundation is based.
How does it feel to be in your childhood home and amongst the space of where your late father did create very significant works and for a period of his life?
Well, it feels very natural and normal to me now, but I've been doing this work here for 45 years now. So it's become a way of life and, a big part of what I do with my time, though I have had other careers as a younger woman before my father's death. But it feels like the right thing to be doing.
You did express through some of your writings this need to find your own voice, and
Oh, yes.
particularly the strength of your father's presence. That I was curious, you have had a career in mental health counseling and as a breast cancer advocate through your own experiences. And so was the decision to come back and really steward the work of your father and the legacy something that felt safe to you, or felt empowering to do, or it felt necessary?
Well, it felt necessary. I'm an only child, and my mother had had a pretty severe stroke a few years prior to my father's death in 1980. Though she survived him by about 12 years, she needed a lot of help in terms of navigating the complexities of dealing with an artist's estate. There is a lot of work to be done and a lot of decisions to be made. But in the early years after his death, this was by no means a full-time occupation for me. Um, I was studying to be a writer. I got a master's degree at Columbia, and I worked as a breast cancer advocate after my diagnosis. I published my first book immediately prior to my breast cancer diagnosis, and that was a memoir about my father called Night Studio, which I'm happy to say is still in print all these years later.
Yes, it's a wonderful book.
Oh, thank you. I'm in the process of actually doing an audio book of it this summer. That's one of my Woodstock summer projects.
Will you be the narrator?
Yes, I'm doing the reading myself while I still have a voice.
That's incredible. So maybe we'll jump to Night Studio. I'm in a bit of a time warp because I read it recently in anticipation for our conversation, and I was completely, I don't know how to describe it, but I feel that the rawness in your father's work is reflected in the way that you write. It was very real and direct, and I went on this journey. Much as a daughter and a father myself, I have my own experiences, and so reflected back in your own experiences and journey was really powerful for me. But also then seeing this other side of your father, who I have read a lot of his lectures and conversations, but I've never participated from this angle before. And I thought it was compelling work. And then I had to register and go, oh, this was written 35 years ago.
Exactly.
Not today, but I felt it was very present and relevant.
Well, thank you for that. This is why in the various subsequent editions of the book, I have not wanted to really change the original at all because I felt like I was able, in part, this is my heritage as my father's daughter. You probably have a sense of how scrupulously honest he was with himself, um, and how self revealing he was. And I think I admired that about him, and in some ways, inherited the courage to do that for myself. But bear in mind that I had also had a history of being trained as a therapist, as a mental health counselor, as you said, and of course had been in therapy myself as a part of that process. So I was thoroughly invested in the idea that you could uh, explore your own life. I could explore my own life and find meaning and transformation in it.
Did you feel that you achieved that through writing the book?
Definitely. And it was not the only uh, way that I've experienced this. Um, my next book was called Examining Myself, and that was about my breast cancer experience and that of the women in my support group, published in 1994. And as a result of these two memoirs and my experiences, sort of making sense of the turbulence of my own life and all the things that I didn't know and needed to know as a young woman, and I was in my 30s still when I began this journey, in my mid 40s when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I became such an advocate of writing as a way of self-discovery that I would do, for many years I did journal workshops that were modeled after a particular workshop that I had found really helpful that was devised by a psychologist named Ira Progoff, called the intensive journal method. And it's really a way of being in dialogue with yourself as opposed to with a therapist or friends or anybody who would reflect back their own sense of what was going on, and you make your own way. This was a result of Dr. Progoff's investigation, not of people who were struggling with emotional problems, but of people who were self-actualized as creative spirits and geniuses. And this really struck a resonant chord for me. And I wanted to bring it to others as part of my, I also see myself as a facilitator and a helper. That was my first real career.
I agree that there is this sense of healing, because what I found, particularly in Night Studio, is you were exploring and you went on an arc. And I think a lot about, just in human relationships, this transition from seeing our parent as our parent and our whole world, and then recognizing them or learning to understand them as an adult and a human being as we
Right.
become adults. It can be very difficult, I think, for people to come through that shift of
It can be.
recognize uh, the rawness of who our parents really are, not in
Mm-hmm.
any positive or negative way, but the reality. And so in your memoir, you reflect on your own understanding, and you reflect on, oh, well, as a child, maybe I didn't speak up when I needed to, or I didn't have clarity. And
Mm-hmm.
it felt very healing. In talking about being a facilitator, you were teaching the reader how to take responsibility for misunderstandings, or maybe as a child, or how to look at things from a different point of view or open a new understanding. And I feel that in your books and this role as a healer. And even though you've reflected on this story that your father made a painting of you after he had his first heart attack as a caretaker,
Yeah.
and that was maybe not what you wanted to be seen as, but in many ways you have embodied that role, not as of a service of generosity, and as of a service of what you continue to do now with the Guston Foundation.
Well, I would say that working on Night Studio and taking on managing his legacy and his estate has has given me a perspective that I learned early on, actually, in the writing of the book, that it wasn't so much about exploring my deep hidden feelings and resentments and sense of neglect and all of that, although that's there. It was really about learning who he was and who he was to others and the contribution that he made to the world, which cost him a lot. I mean, he was a pretty troubled, difficult person, and he basically used himself up by the young age of 66. He was tormented in a way that I was not. I had the great benefit of my mother's unconditional love and support throughout my childhood and adulthood. And that gave me a kind of stability that he could not because of his total immersion in his own creative process. But I learned over time and through the process of writing and hearing about what his work has meant to really, literally, by now, thousands and thousands of people, um, that he really belongs to the world, or what he has created belongs to the world. And so the figure who was my father plays a much lesser role in my life now, but the works that he has created play a very central role, not only in my life, but to the expert staff of our foundation and to so many curators, museum directors, gallerists, and others around the world that I've worked with these last many years. And so I've made myself into something of an expert, I guess you could say, but an expert with a very decided point of view. I'm not trained as an art historian, although I got my undergraduate degree in art history. But I try to have the same kind of fundamental generosity that I think my father had. And I'm very proud of the work we've done at the foundation. We just did, this is changing the subject entirely. I hope that's okay. But our wonderful executive director, Sally Radick, who is fluent in Spanish, took on the project of restoring an early mural that my father made with the artist who actually turned out to be my first father-in-law, but that's another story, Reuben Kadish. He and Reuben Kadish, when they were 22 years old, went down to the city of Morelia, Mexico, at the invitation of the great Mexican muralist Siqueiros, and painted a huge mural called The Struggle Against Terrorism. And by huge, I mean it's 40 feet tall. It's vast, and it deals with the theme of inhumanity, really, man's inhumanity. And it's a powerful work that was in very poor condition. And we were able to work with the Mexican government and their incredible conservators, because there are so many great murals in Mexico from that era, to complete the conservation and to celebrate that this January. So
Wow.
I'm really proud of that. If you look on YouTube, you'll find a video that documents that process.
How do you think, because did your father also meet Diego Rivera and that group of Mexican muralists?
I think they met, but there was not a strong influence. The connection with Siqueiros was through his friend Reuben Kadish, Siqueiros had come up to, as Rivera did too, to Los Angeles, where they both live, these young artists, and done a large mural there. And I believe that Reuben had worked as an assistant to him, so he had a relationship. But my father didn't really have a close relationship with the Mexicans.
I'm curious if those, the very socio-political activism and those murals, I've seen them in Mexico City. They're phenomenal, and they're quite powerful. That through both doing murals while he was in New York City for public art and working on this mural, how that impacted or gave him courage or a pathway to follow both narrative in his work but also activism as a way of using the image. Because you've talked about, and he talks about, how important it is for him to have a speak up about the injustices that he was feeling at the time.
He felt very strongly, especially at sort of critical points of his career, that it was important for him as an artist to be a witness to everything that was wrong with the world. And there were, as I said, critical times during the 1930s, certainly in the very beginning of a very repressive time in California, when these two young artists were trying to secure mural commissions and were unable to paint the kinds of subjects that they felt were socially meaningful. This is what drew them to Mexico, because the muralists there really saw their work as art for the people, not for the elites. And that was important. But even before he went to Mexico, he had painted these murals of the Klansmen whipping black people. He was very influenced by the famous Scottsboro case, where a group of young black boys in the South were accused of, well, it's a whole long story, but it was a false accusation. And these kinds of sort of social turmoil was always a problem, but particularly persecution, he felt. I suppose the next time you really see this emerge in his work is at the end of the Second World War, when Pulitzer brought back images to St. Louis, where my father was teaching at the time, of the concentration camps being liberated, and put up an exhibition in St. Louis of large-scale photographs of, stacks of bodies and the horrors of the war, because Joe Pulitzer felt so strongly that the American people should really see what had happened over there, because there had been such resistance and such isolationism, really, until the bombing of Pearl Harbor finally drew us into the war. But he tried, and I think felt himself largely unsuccessful in conveying the horror that whole experience was for him, as the child of Jewish immigrants who had fled Odessa, present-day Ukraine, as a result of the pogroms in the first decade of the 20th century. They came over first to Montreal and then settled in Los Angeles. And so he felt that very deeply, but felt very frustrated in expressing it, and then went through a period of close to 20 years, really, of working in an abstract way, of really exploring the possibilities of abstract expressionism, and as did many of his contemporaries. But it was only in 1968, in part as a reaction to the turmoil of those years. The 60s were very difficult in the United States, particularly assassinations and all kinds of, the civil rights movement was in full swing by then. And it really affected him very deeply. And he started to paint some of the kinds of subjects that he had painted as a very young man, these clan figures. And they became these hooded figures, which probably this is not the conversation to go into detail, and lots of people have written about it. But suffice it to say that he returned to his social concerns, including finally fulfilling, I think, in some of the sort of horrific leg paintings of the mid-1970s, to expressing his sense of the horrors of the Holocaust and of genocide of any kind. These were things, as a socially conscious and aware artist, that always haunted him. He felt them deeply, and he felt it was an artist's responsibility to manifest those concerns as a way of connecting with his society.
Those paintings, particularly, I think of Painter Forms too, which he did in 78.
78, Painter's Forms too, yeah.
And there's so much pain in that picture.
Yes.
And it makes it so difficult because it's also a beautiful painting. And I wanted to ask you about that period of being in abstraction after being interested in these social issues. Do you feel that that period of abstraction was an opportunity to explore painting as a
Yes,
formal
absolutely.
practice? And it wasn't that he was separating himself
Not
from
at
social
all.
issues. It was like building a memory, or building equipping himself with the skills so that he could then go and
Equipping, that's very astute. This is so Harry Cooper, who was the wonderful curator at the National Gallery, who organized the retrospective that just first was postponed, but ultimately realized has a wonderful way of putting it. He said, in his earliest work, my father, or Guston, as he would say, found out what he wanted to paint. In his abstract work, he found how to paint, because he was very dissatisfied with the flatness that he had been painting before. And then in the final work, his late work, he put those two together. And that's what makes, I mean, your observation about the beauty of the handling of the paint in that horrific painting is one thing that is it. I think that duality is in large part responsible for why the work still remains as relevant as it has, because it's not illustrative or descriptive. It's much more than that. And you can see that he's felt his way through the whole experience of painting.
We're both feeling, I think there's a quote he says, or maybe you've written this in Night Student, it was being close and intimate with the fragility of life and keeping it alive. And
that sounds more like me than him. He was a much more direct and concrete speaker.
It was from Night Studio. And so I think about, he was living so closely with the pain and his own internal pain,
Yes.
plus the pain of the world, but then also this intimacy with the material.
Yeah.
And not hesitating to scrape off an entire painting and start again, because he was unsatisfied with the formal issues of painting, which I think then brings this metaphysical reaction as a viewer. Because I agree with you, it's confusing for me on a timeline where he exists, because it is very present. And as we know now, with that retrospective, there was current topical issues, unfortunately, that we are still facing.
Yes.
That he was facing, and his work became a conduit for those conversations to be had. And
Yeah.
it feels very exciting, and it feels like, well, I wanted to ask you about, with your work with the Guston Foundation, is that he built all of these bodies of work, and I think also you've shared that in that last period, from the late 60s until his passing, that it was 2/3 of his body of work. It was very prolific.
That's correct. Well, of his paintings, yes.
And so he produced all this work, and you then came on to take care of it and steward it and ensure that it was given to the world. And I wonder what you think about your work with the foundation and the estate is just as relevant, because it needs someone to.
I think that's going a little too far, or farther than I would go anyway.
You have shaped the way that this work has been presented to the public.
I have, but I am, to be absolutely fair, I am not the only one. I am the latest one. He,
Yeah.
in one thing I feel very strongly is that artists need champions. They need people in their lives who believe fully in their work and are willing to do whatever it takes to make it accessible, to put it out into the world. And I am not by any means the first champion. There have been, I think, principal among his champions was David and Renee McKee, who first became involved. Well, David McKee became involved in the mid 1960s with my father. He worked at Marlborough Gallery, and he was responsible for the exhibition that was so controversial of the hooded figures in 1970 that essentially resulted in my father being excommunicated from the art world. But during that time, he remained a steadfast champion and ultimately was able to secure the exhibitions and finally, at the end of his life, the sales that made it possible for my father to go on working. So I took up that mantle, actually not on my father's death. I was dealing more with the legal and financial and tax issues for many years. But David and Renee were still dealing with the work itself. It was really not until they retired in 2015 that I became as directly involved as I am now. We formed the foundation in 2013, and people are often curious about that. Why did you wait so long to form a foundation? Your father had been dead, 33, 33 years at that point. But I was always, my father had a near fatal heart attack about a year before his death. And he was very explicit with me about not forming a foundation. He did not want to have happened to his work what had happened to his friend Mark Rothko's work as a result of his foundation, and which was that essentially it was engineered into a bulk sale that benefited some of the officers of his foundation. It was a very complex and difficult legal case that ended up in court for years and ultimately was won by Rothko's children, but it was painful for everyone.
Painful.
And I think that Rothko's legacy has not ultimately suffered, but during that time, it is not what was supposed to happen. So consequently, I felt the need to protect him from that, and I felt like I had good advice and help. Um, and so I took a long time before deciding to do a foundation. Really, it was the aging process that made me want to do this. 12 years ago, when I turned 70, I decided I better start thinking about the future. Um, After I'm gone, I better make plans, for his legacy. And I am so grateful I did, because it's made it possible for me to, or for us to accomplish things that we never would have done before. Um, we were able to do a catalog raisonné of the painting, and now we're working on the drawing and make it freely accessible to everybody. I hope you've explored philipguston.org. We're just redesigning our website. We've been up and running for 5 years, so it's time for a redesign.
It's very generous that you have put this online archive together, because something I have a frustration with is wanting to go to an institution and see a Philip Guston painting and there's nothing on view, or there's one. I understand the Met is going through some renovations, so I'll give them a bit of grace, but even other paintings, like I've been looking for Piero della Francesca paintings, and there's only one on view. I went to the Louvre and there was only one on view. And
But you know who has a really wonderful, the
the
Frick,
Frick,
it's just reopened.
5 in one room, and I just couldn't believe it. I was so happy, but there's this, I'd love to just in my daily life
Mm-hmm.
go and say hello to a Guston painting and just
Well,
check in, but it's not available all
not
the time. So
yet.
your catalog
Not
is
yet. Well,
very
there is
good.
that. But of course, there's nothing like seeing paintings in the
Mm,
flesh. You really have
mm,
to, right? But I have made plans for that. Um, they're not immediate plans, but my mother and I this was started by my father. We had a not for sale collection. There were certain works that were never available for sale because we wanted them to be available to museums for exhibitions. And sometimes it's very difficult to secure private loans and even
mm.
loans from other museums. So we had this large not for sale collection of the best of the best. And over the years, I had been, and my mother had been, giving works away to museums that would not have the means or the wealthy collectors to have Gustons in their own collection. So when my mother died, she gave as a bequest almost 100 paintings to almost as many museums, mostly small regional museums, but also
That's
larger
incredible.
museums. If you like the late work, take a look at Red Cloth. I don't know that it's on exhibit now, but at the Brooklyn Museum, it's one of the big leg paintings. But at any rate, there are many. One of my great frustrations is with the Museum of Modern Art. We have given them so much work over the years, and they rarely exhibit very much of it at all. So I had amassed this group of 100, about 100 paintings, major paintings from all periods of his work, and about 120 of the most important drawings. And I did not, as I considered what I wanted to have happened after my death, I did not want them to go to individual museums because it, you never know what um, they're going to actually exhibit or display, and in what context. And so,
It also loses the scholarship of the history of the work.
absolutely, that's perfectly put. And so this is now a couple of years ago, made a list and started talking with the people that I trust about what museum should I approach. And, I was told, well, maybe a regional museum would take them or whatever. And I thought, I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to go to the One World Museum in New York City, one of the great museums of the world, because it so happened that I knew Max Hollein, the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, from an exhibition when he was a museum director in Germany and had a Guston show a few years before that. And I thought, and then I heard about the Tang wing. Oscar Tang and his wife Agnes gave a very large sum to the Met for the reconstruction of their modern and contemporary wing. And so it was right around the time that I was like turning this over in my head. What should I do? And I knew that the Met had that their collection of 20th century art was lacking in some ways. It was strong in some of the earlier periods, but not so much mid-century and after. And so I thought maybe there would be receptiveness, And sure enough, Max was eager to talk about it, and we very quickly were able to come to an agreement whereby they will always have a certain number of Gustons on exhibit, and they have a superb collection, really the best collection in the world, or they will. And right now they've been exhibiting ever since we signed the document. They've been exhibiting Guston continuously. Right now they have a room of 33 Gustons. I bet you didn't know that. At the Met.
I went on the website.
It's not on the website because it's not a special exhibition.
Can't believe that.
So if you can visualize,
I'll be there tomorrow.
if you can visualize the current modern and contemporary wing, there is this funny mezzanine level on two sides that it's only accessible really from the ground floor or the top floor. It doesn't connect otherwise with the rest of the museum, but in Gallery 916, there are 33 of the small panels that my father did between 1968 and 72, I think, is the latest. And it's a strange space, but a lovely exhibition.
That's amazing. Thank you for organizing that, because I think undoubtedly he has impacted many artists and also non-artists at looking at his work, and that is a real gesture to the public to give visual opportunity to be exposed to his paintings. And I don't understand the museum system and how it all works and the agreements that need to be made, but being able to facilitate that, and the Met is an incredible.
I was very proud of myself.
Yeah, that's your father would be incredibly proud.
I hope so.
I was curious what your vision is for the future. You are sharing that you've been planning ahead in how to share his work, but in 100 years' time, those paintings will still be.
I'm hoping, yeah.
We're still here.
It's one of the great museums. It'll be a corner piece of their 20th century modern and contemporary collection. They talk about it in terms of, well, Leonard Lauder, who just died this last week, gave his wonderful collection of Cubist painting to the museum. And they talk about their Guston collection in the same terms as the Cubist collection, which I find very gratifying, you know. They really see him as a modern master and are intent on exhibiting him that way. Now, you know, one can't predict, of course, what the museum will become in future. But if there is any museum in the United States that's likely to stay that course, it's got to be the Met.
It's also where he's done his work.
Yes, exactly. I wanted it to be in New York. I definitely did.
It's like he sweated out in New York,
It's true.
everything.
It's true. But we have many other plans for the future. This October, there is going to be an exhibition at the Musée Picasso in Paris. It's an interesting show by a curator who worked for the Beaubourg and still is employed there, but they're closed for renovations right now of the Richard Rogers building. And so he's guest curating at the Musée Picasso. There will be a few Picasso caricatures in the show because the art world caricatures, which have never been exhibited, that my father did in the 1950s, will be exhibited. They'll be exhibiting the complete Poor Richard series of satirical Nixon drawings and a small Guston survey from early to last works. So if you find yourself in Paris between October and March, that might be a good excuse to go.
Yeah, I think it's more the excuse. I was in Paris last year at the Picasso Museum, and there was a Giorgio de Chirico painting. Oh, the name has just... It was The Wrestlers, or there was a combat. And in it, because Guston has talked quite openly about his admiration
Oh,
of de
yes,
Chirico,
absolutely.
and there's
He
that
loved.
hand punching with the shield
Mm-hmm.
in this painting,
Yep.
which I had never seen in a de Chirico. I'd only ever seen it through Guston, and I then saw this connection of an imagery that came
Oh,
through, and I thought, oh, that's
absolutely.
his dedication also to the history of art was right there,
Yes.
you know, in honoring that and letting it blossom in however he needed it to be in his work, even in his late paintings.
There was a delightful exhibition that unfortunately didn't travel in Santa Monica, at the Santa Monica Museum. This is now 15 years ago, maybe, of de Chirico and Guston. And it was co-curated by, gosh, I've forgotten his name, but he worked at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which has one of the great, well, it has the great Ahrensburg collection that my father saw as a boy in Los Angeles, and which contains many of the great de Chiricos, like the Soothsayer's Recompense. And so there are lots of things in the future still planned for us. And ideas come to us, you know, people write with their concepts for shows. And one of the things that I absolutely love about sort of shepherding this legacy is reading about and hearing all the different kinds of interpretations and resonance that uh, my father's work has to different people, you know. Um, there's such a wonderful and alive, sort of evolving interpretation and reference to his work. It's it's such a pleasure to see that continually grow.
Mm. Well, it's related to this myth and symbolism, which also exists in your own writing, and that we project our own experiences onto
Yeah.
the work as a healing process. And I think he's talked about he has no idea what's going on, but because of our own interpretation, it actually invokes in us something quite
Mm-hmm.
emotional and deep. And I think that's quite provocative
Yes.
of the works, and yet they're simple, but they're not simple. They're very complex. That they are very alive in that
Yes, they
way,
are.
because there's this maybe this boundary is very thin between tilting off the other side, that he's become so close to that rawness and
Mm-hmm.
contention with his own core and being, that
Yeah.
it's impossible not to be
Disturbed,
pulled by it.
moved.
Yeah, disturbed. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
He paid a price for that.
I wanted to ask you about how that, well, he had a very traumatic childhood in terms of some great
Yes.
losses and shock,
Yes.
finding his father commit suicide, and then his
Brother.
older brother
Yeah.
died. And that would have been incredibly painful and traumatic. And there's this story you share of that his mother would let him lock himself in the closet
Mm-hmm.
and draw when people would come over, because he didn't like the
Mm-hmm.
hurrah or whatever it was that.
He would hide there in the closet when the family, he was the youngest of 7 children. So you can imagine the big family dinners when his mother would, the families would come, and he loved to, I think he got special indulgence as the youngest. I'm sure he did. And he loved the feeling of hiding in this closet and reading and painting or drawing at that point. And being apart from the world in that way.
He must have also felt a lot of safety, and I'm wondering what do you think he discovered in that space, because it's something that he continued to protect fiercely,
Mm.
even within his studio in Woodstock. It's like it was the model of discovery.
Well, it wasn't being alone, being isolated, because his inner world was so richly populated with ideas, with writing, with poetry, with philosophy, with the history of art. He had all these art books that he pored over, and of course, he loved to go. I mean, a great revelation when he went to Italy for the first time and saw the Renaissance murals that he revered so much. So he was constantly turning these ideas over, and then he had wonderful intellectual companions over the years. Many of them poets, interestingly enough, not so much other
Mm,
painters,
mm,
but and he didn't like the analysis of art. He he liked the mystery of it, and the mystery of poetry, I think, intrigued him. And that same ability that poems have, great poetry has, to just get you right in the heart, but you don't know how it does that. It's
mm,
a
mm.
mystery. And the enigmatic quality, all of that was just terrifically fascinating to him. And he loved the enigma. But he was also racked with self-doubt. He always sort of challenged. I mean, for many years, he destroyed much more of his work than he kept. And it really wasn't until he made that sort of breakthrough in 1968, after his work had been reduced to just a few lines. I don't know
The
if you're
pure
familiar with
paintings,
the
yeah,
pure
pure
drawings.
drawings. Do you think they were the catalyst? Because I was curious of that period of, I wasn't sure if he was fearless and just knew in himself that these paintings were where he wanted to go, or if there was a period where he was maybe making those late paintings and destroyed them. And
Well, if you look at his paintings of 1964 and 65, very, they're large, depressive, gray and black mostly works in which these beings that are black forms on a sort of gray cloudscape almost, are coming together, but they haven't really announced themselves yet. So the pure drawings are an extension of that. And one of the most amusing stories that my father told, you may have read this, is when he contacted his close friend at that time, Morton Feldman, the composer, and he said, "Help, I'm down to one line." He was down in Florida at that time, and he had he had left my mother for an affair with another woman, but that didn't work out, and he was desperate. It's like he was losing everything, and he didn't know what would yet happen. You know, he was at that point of reduction of means. But then it was just the next year that he started doing wonderful drawings of objects, small objects. And when you go to the Metropolitan Museum, you won't see those drawings, but you'll see the earliest paintings of objects there.
I've never seen those, so I'm very excited to.
They are usually exhibited in a whole cloud, like they usually show like 20 or 30 of them all coalesced on a wall. But this exhibit has them arrayed over a large room, so you can really look at them carefully.
Do you think that complete collapse of his external world was, in fact, a catalyst for that transition from those very dark, heavy paintings into that purity? It's like he just
I'm sure. Well, he
surrendered. He
said,
couldn't really do anything.
I'm sure you've read this famous quote of his. I got sick and tired of all that purity.
Oh, no, I
Is
haven't.
what he said towards the end of the abstraction. It's like he was sick of it in his own work, but he was sick of it in the art world. Uh, uh, I have these at the end of Night Studio are these studio notes that I found after his death, just scrawled on yellow pen in his desk, and he says, "American abstract art is a lie, a
Oh, it's a
sham."
sham. I've read
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
They're all fake.
Well, by that time, it had become very fashionable, um,
He didn't care
as
though, did
happens to
he?
everything. About what?
That he wasn't part of it, or did he want to be part of it, or was he committed more
Well,
to his own search of finding
I
his
would.
own?
I think it was a mixture for him. He never was really included in the most select group. De Kooning, Pollock, Klein, Rothko were sort of, I don't know, the chosen group, and he was slightly outside that.
Mm-hmm.
And his contentious relationship with Jackson Pollock was a part of that, I guess, who had been a boyhood pal of his, but it had gone its own way. But he just had different thoughts about it. I mean, after years of seeking some kind of essence, that's what drew him, I think, to Morty Feldman's work, um, was that they shared that search for the ineffable, the enigma, you know, in the work. But then he got sick and tired of all that purity. He wanted to tell stories, he said.
Mm. Was your father religious, or did he have a
Not at all.
spiritual? No.
Well, not in any conventional religious sense.
He talks about the force coming through him, and
Yeah, but that
it was very focused in a painting studio.
I think just I mean, he talks about that as being common to the creative impulse.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you know that you really are onto something. That he says when you begin. I'm paraphrasing here. He says that the composer John Cage told him, when you start, the whole world is in your studio with you. the art world, the critics, the dealers, the museums, everybody. And one by one, as you work, they leave. And then if you're really lucky, you leave. So is that spirituality? Is that religiosity? I don't know. It probably is. It's certainly in awe of a force beyond.
I also think it's about the human experience and really meeting it at its essence,
Yeah, sure.
being vulnerable.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you about your experiences as a child growing up, because your father is very well educated through literature and art,
Completely self-educated.
which is incredible, and then was part of this prolific dialogue that was happening in New York City amongst the artists. And also, you share that you engaged in a dialogue with him at your kitchen table. And while you may not have wanted it at the time, being dragged along to these events and observing these conversations, how do you feel, both through being present and engaged, and also the contribution of being given ideas to think about, that shaped your ability to think not so much differently, but just this more complex sense of...
It has impacted me. I don't begin to pretend that my intellectual life is on the level that his was. I read from his library, I would try as a teenager when I had the opportunity to impress him with my understanding. And, I mean, this is a man who gave his 11-year-old daughter Kierkegaard, This is probably not the smartest thing to
That's
do.
incredible.
And I was fortunate in that I had the kind of disposition that could not enter too dark a place as a result of that. But I think he was, I always felt like to get his attention, I had to try to move to the plane where he was. He was never going to come to me where I was in my ordinary little life. And to some extent, I suppose that's still true. That working on his legacy, even though a lot of it is very pragmatic work, it's not highfalutin or anything, but that it does give me a chance to partake of that sort of rarefied space that I experienced with him as a child or as a teenager more like, and a young adult with him.
Yeah, it's like that pulling, trying to keep up, but in doing so, developed your own perspectives of the world, and maybe
Oh
in ways
yeah.
you don't understand, and
Oh well, I
contributed to
mean,
thinking.
I always knew that what was missing um, in what I got from my father was a sense of real engagement. I mean, he was engaged with the world, yes, but he didn't want to enter into the lives of the people around him. He was too interior, he was too immersed in his own intellectual and creative life to do that. So I suppose from my mother, I got the experience of sort of selfless attention and just being
Nourishment.
nourishment and just being fascinated by other people's interior worlds. That, I mean, I obviously cultivated that as a foil to my father as a child, and it has served me well as a parent, as a therapist, as a writer, I suppose. Um, it's an interesting mix of characteristics, I guess. I can say that, toward the end of my life, I look back at where I've we all gather things from different experiences in our lives, and I feel very rich. I feel like I've been fortunate in having a very unusual upbringing, but also, just feeling a big part of the world too, because I'm more connected with people.
Do you feel now in hindsight, definitely at the time it may have been painful or difficult to not be that focused attention from your father, that it was necessary for him to be the way that he was and so fiercely protective to do the work that he's done?
I do. I feel that. It makes me think of something that only seems a little related, but maybe it's more related. When I published Night Studio, I got a whole, range of reviews, and I found them at the time very disconcerting, because when you put your whole self out like that, it's a very vulnerable position to be in. But on the one extreme, from an art critic, uh, Deborah Solomon said, "This is a serpent's tooth of a book." She called it. What did she expect from her father? He was an artist. And on the other side, it was like I got taken to task by the feminists, who sort of castigated me for not holding him to account for his neglect of me and for his total self-involvement, just like a man with a perfect artist wife and all of that. And I got this whole range of responses, and continue to, from people who relate in some way, not only the children of artists, but just people in general trying to come to terms, as you were saying, with their parents' influences, and it's just all in the eye of the beholder, or the psyche of the beholder.
Well, I also think, because there are so many possible points of views and everyone's argument is valid because that's how they feel or they want to
Sure.
voice that injustice. At the same time, I do see through the works, and I obviously have never met him, but there is a lot of pain and the capacity to hold that space. The drinking, the smoking, it just feels everything was so fragile and restless that,
Oh yeah, it was scary
yeah, there's just no
to
even
me.
capacity to give to anyone else. Yeah.
Yeah. And he died at 66.
It's incredible.
To me, he was now at 82, he was a young man, he just burned very brightly.
Yeah. That's a lovely way to put it. He burned very brightly. Will you continue to write? Do you want to write more, or is that something you feel passionate about?
What I'm working on now is I'm just completing work on a collection of my mother's journals.
Oh, wow.
It's called Life with P,
Oh.
which is how she always, P period, the journals of Musa McKim Guston. And it turned out I was only able to do this with the help of our foundation staff. When we put my mother used to have these little journal notebooks, and that she kept in her little purse, and everywhere she went, she'd be taking notes. Uh, but I never really read through them all, nor did I read all of the transcripts that she made of some of them. But the staff scanned every page of every notebook and classified them into years and time within years, which was a tremendous job. And I realized when this was all presented to me, that I had a decade, and that decade began with 1966 and it ended with 1976, which were really crucial years. It begins at the time that my father left my mother for another woman, and my mother went off to MacDowell, the artist colony, and started to write. And it ends shortly before she had her stroke, after which she never really wrote anything new again. So it's been I put together a book of my mother's poems not too long after she died, called Alone with the Moon. But this is sort of a further step to show their lives together during this really critical period. I'm really curious to know how interested people who are Guston lovers will find it, and how I am always been totally charmed and interested in this, but I'm very close to it, of course. So it'll be intriguing to me to see. And, we're illustrating it and having a great time putting it together. So that's not exactly an answer to your question, because it's not. It is a creative project for me. I am writing introduction and explanatory text and whatever I need, but it's really her that I'm trying to bring forward. After that, I don't know.
Well, I hope something comes through. I find your writing very, it's complex, which is nice to read. Emotionally complex, not in it's an emotionally questioning of my own self.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is definitely my father's legacy.
Yeah.
In him, it took more the form of self-doubt. In me, it's more like inquiry,
Yeah, inquiry is a good word.
without the heaviness
The trauma,
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was fortunate enough to have a childhood without the kind of trauma that he faced.
I did want to ask you one question about your parents. So your mother, Musa McKim, is a poet. She wrote these beautiful, endearing. One of my favorites is Black No. I think she has the same kind of humor as your father in that way. But they did the poem pictures, and I was curious how that started. Was that, in a way, you talked about love letter notes, or did they decide to collaborate, or was it something that just happened?
I wish I knew more about it. I know when it happened, but I wasn't around then. With everything else going on, when I was working on Night Studio, I don't think that I really asked my mother about how they came to being. I know that, but here's what I think. I think that he had been asked by poet friends to do covers for chapbooks and perhaps responses or reactions to poems that they wrote. The principal among them were Bill Berkson, California poet and dear friend, and Clark Coolidge. If you ever come across a book now out of print called Baffling Means, he did, my father did, 30 some poem pictures of his. He did an illustration for Stanley Kunitz, a poster actually of one of Stanley's poems. And I think he probably just started asking my mother for poems and, doing some of hers. And when I think I know what the first one was. And though I can't be sure because none of them are dated.
Do you know can you share the title?
Yeah, the first one is called Summer 1953. And it's just one of my mother's delightful impressionistic poems about the natural world around her. I think it may have been written then, but the poem picture was made, I believe, in the early 70s.
Feels like this nice, tender connection between your parents that
Yes.
it
By
was
that time,
difficult, but
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, well, it was difficult earlier,
Mm.
clearly, but after they reconciled, which happens during this period of that the journals cover, though she doesn't write about it in very explicit terms, it's nevertheless referenced there. And
Well, she's a poet. She doesn't need to say much.
exactly.
Saying much
Ex-
with saying a lot at the same time.
yes, yes. So I think you will. I think you will love this book. Actually,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I didn't realize she was. Well, you talked a lot about her painting, and her paintings are quite tender, but the poetry for me is magic.
yeah, it is.
And as you said earlier, it just hits in this way that is unexplainable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have this quote that your father said, and it's, I like pastrami. I just like it. I couldn't tell you why. And I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were of how he made choices and changes and decisions in his work, and maybe also how you've learned to make your steps and decisions, both in your own work and towards his.
I think I've inherited my father's um, love of food and taste. He had this wonderful, I would say, probably the term would be gustatory memory. He would remember what he had at any given restaurant at any given time. Um, he He was a man of great appetites, and I, for better or worse, have inherited a lot of those appetites. And although I was able to stop smoking, he gave me my first cigarette when I was 15.
Mm.
Uh, he never stopped. Um, and he drank, and I don't, but um, choices in life. Um, I think he had a real sense of um, sort of basic pleasures. Uh, when he and Philip Roth had a sort of common ground there. They used to drive around and look for places that had what they mutually agreed upon was crapola, sort of fundamental things that people enjoyed. Um, he didn't like really fancy things. He liked basic things, and I find myself in that category. I'm never that comfortable at five-star hotels or in the top, Michelin starred restaurants. It's not that I don't like good food. I just like basic things. I mean, I cook some of the recipes my father taught me that his mother taught him,
Mm.
Sort of like basic Russian Jewish borscht and things like that.
Did he
Um,
ever illustrate a cookbook or write his recipes down?
no, but he certainly has lots of pictures of food
Mm. What do you celebrate, Musa, in life?
in life, experience, really. Uh, Friendships, that I think experiences more than anything else. Um, Especially as have gotten older, and I mean, I don't buy things anymore, even though I could. But I love to travel. I love to spend time with my sons um, and my husband. Just the basic pleasures of life. I love to swim. I love to eat. I love to cook. Simple things.
Yeah, the essence of
Yeah,
living.
yeah.
It's really lovely. Thank you for talking with me and sharing so many different avenues of looking at both your father's work and how he created and the contribution. Did you imagine that his work would be this way today, represented in this way, received in this way?
I don't know that I ever allowed myself to think that far into the future. I just took it from one step to the next, you know. But looking back, I am really very gratified at what has happened and at the way that we're handling his legacy has changed my life and my family's life. Um, it's been a journey. It's been an adventure. It really has.
It was like an unknown gift.
Yeah. Well, certainly a gift.
I mean, a
Oh,
gift, yeah. Not a material gift, and a gift of growth
that
and journey.
too.
Yeah.
That too, to be able to, after my father's death, to pursue my own interests and not to not be working full time.
The freedom.
The freedom to do that is an enormous gift. And it was a gift that he always wanted in his life. He was never happier than when he didn't have to teach full time. And, although he was a wonderful teacher and celebrated for that, it still took time away from the studio,
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to We Are Art People. You can listen to full episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We are online at www.weareartpeople.com. Sign up to our newsletter for show updates and happenings, and please share with someone who may enjoy listening. See you next time.